I turned toward her and saw her glaring at the guests. I followed her gaze, and what I saw made my heart stop. My mother-in-law was making her grand entrance with a smug look on her face. She was with a man and wearing an off-white lace dress. For a moment, I thought Alana's gasp was because of the dress, which didn't bother me since it was typical of her to pull such a stunt. I was about to turn back and resume the ceremony, but then I saw it. It wasn't the dress or her dramatic entrance that shocked Alana. It was the man she was with, my abusive ex-husband, Joseph. Seeing Joseph felt like a punch in the gut. It took me a long time to recover from that marriage and its consequences. Even now, thinking about those years makes me feel sick. And here he was on my wedding day, ruining what should have been the happiest moment of my life. I was terrified and momentarily forgot where I was, feeling like I had been transported back to my past. Alana saw what I was going through and came to hold my hand, bringing me back to reality. How could my mother-in-law do this to me? How could she bring him here, knowing the pain and trauma he caused me? I wanted to scream and run away. My husband, concerned, kept asking what was wrong, but I couldn't speak. In my confusion, I realized that while he knew about my ex and my first marriage, he didn't know what Joseph looked like. I just stared at my mother-in-law blankly. Alana said something to my husband, and before I could react, he sprang into action. With a determined look, he marched over to his mother and my ex, demanding they leave. The tension in the room was palpable. My mother-in-law refused, claiming she had a right to watch her son get married. My husband, losing patience, told her that if she didn't leave, we would call the police. She argued that she had done nothing wrong, but I felt sick and needed to sit down. My bridesmaids and mom did their best to calm me down, handling the situation as best they could. The only part of the conversation I actually heard was my husband threatening to call the police on my mother-in-law for bringing someone I had a restraining order against. My ex then spoke, sending chills down my spine. He claimed the restraining order had expired and the law couldn't do anything about it. I had completely forgotten about that. My ex continued, telling my husband he should be glad his mother was trying to stop him from marrying me, claiming I would ruin his life as I had ruined his. There were gasps from the guests. I couldn't believe what was happening. Before he could say more, my husband ran over and punched him in the face. Chaos erupted. Our groomsmen had to step in to defuse the situation, and my ex was eventually thrown out of the venue. By then, someone had called security as well. My ex didn't come back, but my mother-in-law was still there. At that point, it had been almost an hour since this whole drama started. In my head, I accepted that my wedding was over and I wasn't getting married that day. I wasn't even feeling sad anymore. I was just numb. My bridesmaids had taken me inside, and I was sitting in the dressing room alone because I needed some breathing space. I was wondering what to do next when I heard a knock at the door. It was my husband. He asked if he could come in, and of course I said yes. He sat down and apologized for everything that had happened. He said he should have been firmer with his mom from the beginning and not let things get this far. He asked me to forgive him. I couldn't believe this man. Here I was, blaming myself for everything, and he was asking for forgiveness. I broke down, and we both started crying. After I was more stable, I told him he had nothing to apologize for. We sat in silence for a while, holding hands. After some time, he told me he had asked the guests to leave, and only our wedding party was still there. He said, although it wasn't how we hoped things would be, he wanted nothing more than to marry me. I wasn't sure I could walk down the aisle again after what had happened, but looking at his hopeful face, I couldn't say no. So I walked down the aisle to my best friend and biggest supporter. This time we said our vows, looking into each other's eyes without any interruptions. We got married with only our closest friends as witnesses. After the ceremony, we danced and had a little intimate reception, donating all the leftover food. We came back home as husband and wife for the first time, and all the bad things that had happened seemed like a distant nightmare. We went on our honeymoon and didn't talk about the ceremony or my mother-in-law once. I tried to bring it up a few times, but my husband wouldn't let me, saying we shouldn't let it sabotage our happiness again. I was curious but agreed with him. However, throughout the honeymoon he acted kind of suspicious. He took a lot of phone calls, and every time I asked who it was, he said it was work. This was unusual because his workplace never bothers him on vacations. I asked if there was any trouble, but he brushed it off, saying they were just busy and needed his help. It still seemed weird to me, but I trusted him completely and focused on enjoying our time together. Our honeymoon was 2 weeks long, and we got back a few days ago. Yesterday, I overheard my husband talking on the phone and sounding really agitated. I asked him who it was and if everything was all right. He tried to brush it off as work stuff, but I knew he was hiding something and wouldn't stop bugging him until he told me what was going on. That's when I found out that ever since the disaster, on our wedding day, my husband had been secretly battling with my mother-in-law, trying to get her to leave us alone. He had told her at the wedding that she would never see him again, but she didn't take him seriously and kept calling him during our honeymoon until he had to block her from everything. That didn't work either because she kept calling his work every day, pretending to be sick and saying it was urgent. This made the receptionist worriedly reach out to him. Even though he was on vacation, my husband knew this was just her creating drama to get his attention. She had faked being sick to break no contact before, but this was the first time she involved his work. My husband didn't want his co-workers to find out about these things, so he unblocked her and reached out. She was hysterical, claiming she was extremely sick and needed him to come to her immediately. He told her he didn't owe her anything and never planned on seeing her again, but if she was truly sick, he could arrange for a nurse to stay with her. He knew she wasn't actually sick. She threw a fit, saying she didn't want a stranger living with her when her own son was available. She knew we were on our honeymoon. My husband lost his patience and told her if she couldn't accept his help, there was nothing else he could do, then hung up. She wouldn't accept this and kept calling him relentlessly. It got to the point where my husband had to tell his secretary not to take her calls or messages anymore. Around this time, I noticed something was up and confronted him. He didn't want her interrupting our honeymoon and upsetting me, so the next morning he called her and told her if she didn't stop, she'd never see him again. He hung up before she could respond, and she didn't call again for the rest of our honeymoon. But of course, it wasn't that simple. She waited until we were back from our honeymoon. My husband thought she had decided to leave us alone, but he was wrong. Her lawyer reached out, saying if he didn't start responding to her, she'd file an elder abuse case against him for neglecting her during a time of serious illness. When he asked what illness, the lawyer claimed we were causing her mental trauma by cutting her off, affecting her blood pressure. Let me be clear, my mother-in-law has no record of blood pressure issues. This was just a plot to make him feel guilty or create enough of a scene to make him break no contact. We all know this, but she'd never admit it. The conversation I overheard my husband having was with his lawyer. Both lawyers suggested we should resolve this ourselves rather than go to court. My husband's lawyer said fighting this would be tedious, and family courts are usually soft on elders, making it a waste of time. So the easiest option seems to be my husband apologizing and breaking no contact. But he's still extremely upset about the wedding and doesn't want to let it go. We know this would just make my mother-in-law feel like she can continue to violate our boundaries without consequences. My husband has been beating himself up over this and didn't want to tell me because he knew I'd blame myself. He told me he's okay with taking it to court, and that if I didn't want us to be in contact with my mother-in-law, we wouldn't be, no matter what. I'm extremely conflicted. I haven't and will never forgive my mother-in-law for what she did at my wedding. I can't pretend nothing happened and have her in my life again, but I also feel guilty about what my husband is going through. I've considered telling him I'm okay with him having her in his life, but I know I'll never feel safe around her again. Would I be the bad guy for choosing to stay no contact with my mother-in-law, even if it means legal and emotional complications for my husband? Update 1. I didn't expect such overwhelming support for my little rant. I truly appreciate all the kindness I've received through comments and private messages. I haven't been able to reply to everyone, but I am reading everything, and it has given me a lot of clarity. Some of you suggested that my husband and I should take my mother-in-law to court. Since there are no actual medical records involved, she can't prove that we've been neglecting her or causing her physical distress. I agree and have considered that, but I don't want to get involved with lawyers and judges over what is essentially a tantrum thrown by a grown woman. I've been talking to my husband, and we are considering breaking no contact with my mother-in-law. We've gone over every possible scenario, and we think it would be simplest if my husband goes back to being in contact with her. However, we've decided that even if they are on speaking terms, I won't be. I never want to see my mother-in-law again, and my husband agrees. He will make it clear to her that she is not allowed to visit our home or contact me ever. I'm not 100% happy with how things have turned out, but at least I won't have to deal with her again. I'm trying to see the silver lining in all this drama. Some of you have also asked if I am considering taking any action against my ex. Honestly, I think it's not worth it. I'm sure it was my mother-in-law who reached out to him. I don't know what she was trying to achieve. Maybe she thought my husband would leave me because my ex said I ruin lives. My lawyer thinks it would be complicated to renew the restraining order because, apart from the wedding, he hasn't done anything since the divorce. More than that, I don't want to see him ever again. Unless he tries something again, I just want to avoid him. My husband is going to reach out to my mother-in-law and meet her. I hope she agrees to leave me out of it because, if not, I don't know what we'll do. Update 2. Things didn't go as well as we hoped. My husband told his mom he would stay in contact with her and visit regularly, but she wasn't welcome in our house anymore. My mother-in-law threw another tantrum, saying I was isolating her. She claimed that if my husband allowed me to act this way, I wouldn't let her see our future kids. My husband was amazed at how she jumped to that conclusion. He told her we hadn't even thought of having kids anytime soon, and there was no point in making decisions based on something that might not happen for years. She wasn't happy and accused me of mentally abusing her and isolating her. My husband lost his temper and told her that none of this would have happened if she hadn't pulled that stunt at our wedding. He wouldn't tell me what she said about that, but after a lot of pleading, he told me she said she was trying to show him the reality of what kind of woman I am to protect him from marrying me. My husband walked out, saying it doesn't matter what she does anymore. We're done with her. We're prepared to waste time and money on courts and lawyers if it means she won't be in our lives anymore. Update 3. I posted a couple of months ago about my crazy mother-in-law sabotaging my wedding and trying to blackmail my husband and me into forgetting everything she did. Here's an update if anyone is still interested. When my husband told my mother-in-law to call her lawyer, she thought he was bluffing. But we were serious. The next time she tried to reach out, he told her to only contact us through our lawyer. She got offended and started showing up at our house randomly to try and get a hold of him. It got to the point where I was scared to open the door. One particularly frustrating day, I told my husband maybe we should move without telling her. I wasn't serious, but we looked at each other and realized it could really improve things for us. Thankfully, we have enough savings to move to a rented place while our house was being seen by buyers. We contacted a realtor, put up a for-sale sign, and moved almost overnight. We knew my mother-in-law would see the sign and freak out. We settled into our tiny 2-bedroom without unpacking much because we knew our house wouldn't be too hard to sell and started looking for a new place. Sure enough, 2 days after moving out, our lawyer called to say my mother-in-law was bombarding her with questions. We told our lawyer to ignore her and say we would show up for any court dates, but that she shouldn't expect to see either of us ever again. A few days later, we were told she was dropping any cases and wanted my husband to speak to her again. We might consider seeing her someday in the not-so-near future, but for now, we're focusing on our marriage and finding a new place to start over. We're thinking of a condo with good building security to keep out any